Warning. This podcast is about the realities of working in people operations. This is not a stuck-up, PC, compliance-based, or employment law podcast about stuffy, outdated HR practices. Shit will get real here, and we assume no responsibility.
I think one thing that I've been trying to focus a little bit more on is this idea of like keeping my shit together.
Anytime I have set a goal because I thought I was supposed to, or because it sounded cool, it's never fucking happened.
This is the People Problems Podcast with Alexa Baggio and Tyson McKenzie.
Happy New Year, Tyson!
Happy New Year! 2023, we made it!
2023, we survived somehow. It wasn't Y2K 2022, thank God.
Yeah, no. Well, 2022, yeah, like we're happy that that's in the past at this point, but
sayonara.
I'm cautiously entering 2023 with reasonable standards of expectations.
Okay, what define reasonable for me? Because we're about to talk about this, so let's just jump into it. Fuck it.
All right, let's do it. So I'm a victim of the New Year's resolution. I love me a fresh start.
Why do you say victim?
Because I feel like it's more of like a mental model. It's almost like therapeutic for me more than anything else. It's not truly about, making myself, I am very much the same person I was, with a lot of learnings, but like the things that you make resolutions about, healthy, various things, right? I'm still the same person I was in January 2022. You know what I mean? Like I'm not any healthier than I was back then.
Yeah.
So it's more of like a therapeutic refresh for me than anything else, than actual like change.
Yeah.
So
all right, I can see that.
Yeah. So that's why I'm sort of cautiously going into this new year with reasonable expectations.
So I saw a meme recently that was on online that said, "Have I accomplished my goals for this year? No. But did I eat well and exercise often? Not in the least. But did I mature relationally and as a person? Buddy."
So here's the
Pretty
thing.
good.
Here's the thing, and like let's dive right in. When I'm doing my goals and like I'm setting like my New Year's resolutions, I often pick out things that I already do pretty well. So like for example, I actually am like a very
You're such a Leo.
I actually am
Let me just pick the shit I'm already good at.
Right. I am actually I'm a pretty healthy person. Like we eat healthy. I exercise. I get outside. Whatever. I try to meditate when I can. I don't do it often, but I'm pretty healthy. So like I call out some of these things that I do well, and I write them down, and then I fulfill them.
Do more of this.
Keep being amazing, Tyson.
You have figured it out, my love. You have figured out the key to success and happiness.
In goal
write
setting.
down what you're already successful at.
So yeah, but like real talk.
Yeah. So I think before we go yes, our episode today is about goal setting. Obviously, this is the first episode of the new year, so people do New Year's resolutions. So I will be honest with you. I am not a fan of the idea of a New Year's resolution. I don't really believe in it being a resolution, to your point. Like, right. This isn't Lent. Like, I'm the same person I was a year ago. I am what I am. But I am a big believer in goals. I'm a big believer in goal setting. I goal set regularly. And from everything I know, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, it is a very helpful mental exercise, not necessarily because goal setting will by setting a goal, you will automatically be closer to achieving that goal. That's not necessarily true. But the research, at least majority of it, does say that it makes you feel more fulfilled and makes you feel better about motivating yourself. It makes it easier for you to motivate yourself to go do the things you say you want to do. So I realize that people think like, oh, you got to set goals to achieve the goals. And, we'll talk about Goggins and all that crazy shit in a second and what some of the research actually sort of says. But I think it is a really helpful exercise. And I think we use the calendar changing as the excuse to do it. And I'm fine with that. I think, humans need to do this stuff regularly anyway. To take a second to look at what you've been doing, look at maybe how that's different from where you want to be or think you want to be. I don't believe in shooting all over yourself, but just to take a minute and say, where am I actually? And where do I think I can get in a defined amount of time? And so I think that's a really healthy thing for people. I don't really believe in resolutions. Like, I don't think all of a sudden you're going to wake up tomorrow and do the 16 things you want to do to be a perfect human because it's January 1st. you have to do everything sort of 2 degrees at a time. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But I do think it's a helpful exercise. I like that people do it. And I'm curious, what are some of the, before we sort of go into more of the research and some of like our goals and how to do this stuff at work, what are some of the habits or goals that you tend to do or set goals around every year? So for me, it's like, I usually set a goal around travel. I usually set a goal around finance. I obviously have goals for our business. Sometimes I set goals around relationships. What are other things that people set goals around?
Well, fitness. I think I do a lot of the same. Yeah, fitness. I think one thing that I've been trying to focus a little bit more on is this idea of like keeping my shit together. Like, you know what I mean? Like, how can I
keep my shit together?
Keep my I'm in a stage of my life where, I have a very busy job. I have all these extras that I do on top of my job. I have a young daughter. I have a husband. And, it's very easy for that stuff to get to be a lot, right? And I think the biggest thing for me is keeping my mind right, doing that. Yeah. So again, I mentioned that I tried
remembering
to meditate.
That's enough.
Right. And sometimes just laughing at yourself for being in stupid situations and being down to earth about not getting overly attached to something at work or letting it take away from the time that I'm having with my daughter. So it's really about this idea of just protecting my mind the way that I would protect my body and my health and my family. So that's a big thing for me, is just my mental health, I guess, is what I'm saying. Right. Also, as being a mom, I want to make sure that I'm doing everything that I can with to support my daughter and to help her. Being a wife, that's usually the one that goes to the bottom of my list of to-dos. But so those are some of the personal things. But then also from a business standpoint as well, we've got the podcast, I've got HR Shook, as well as my day job. So I set goals around all of those things, and not goals, but is it affirmation? Is that the word I'm looking at? Not affirmation. What's the word when you put it out into the world so that you get it?
Is that not an affirmation?
Maybe it's an affirmation. Anyways.
I don't know.
Putting out all the good juju into the world so that I can achieve the great things.
Nice. Okay. Well, so that's a little different than goal setting, but we're going to talk about that in a second. So I do like the idea of using the framework of what do I want to be? What do I want to accomplish as a wife? What do I want to accomplish as a sister? What do I want to accomplish as a coworker? What do I want to accomplish as a manager? That's a really good framework. Versus just I want to save a bunch of money, lose 10 pounds, travel a lot, and see my mom more. Those feel really standard, and I feel they also kind of just aren't inspiring. And one thing I know about human behavior this point of my career is that people don't do shit they don't want to do.
Yeah, it's really just about how do I, as Tyson, want to show up in the various roles in my life. Yeah.
If I think about, so I write goals every year for New Year's as an exercise. I can say maybe as I'm writing them for this year, I will look back on next year. I don't look back at them regularly, mostly because they're usually things that that are already in my head. They're not brand new ideas. If you're going to come up with a New Year's goal for the following year that you just fucking thought of, odds are it's not going to come to fruition. They should be things that are sort of already a continuation of existing efforts. And actually, I'll talk about that in a second. A lot of the research sort of talks about that. Mm-hmm. But also, I think it's important to remember, we always overestimate what we can do in a month and wildly underestimate what we can do in 5 years, whatever that sort of saying is. And so a year is enough time to think far ahead, but not so much time that you're I'm going to be a radically different person. And my world's going to be upside down. It's 365 days of trying to commit to something. So I think it's a good habit. And so I think we should talk for a quick second about maybe how you do some of this well.
Okay.
So everyone is probably very familiar with what I would consider to be sort of the most standard, sort of well-known version of setting a goal, which is setting a SMART goal.
SMART goals.
So SMART goals are they're actually kind of a thing of the past now, I think, but it was kind of the original research around achiever culture and setting goals. And so for those of you that don't know or don't remember, a SMART goal is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. And it's basically a little acronym to tell people to be like, you can't just say your goal is like, I want to lose weight. Like, it's not specific enough for you to be able to achieve it. There's lots of mental reasons for that, and we'll talk about that in a second. But it has to be like, it has to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So I want to lose 5 pounds in 6 months, or in 3 months. You could even make it more specific, by
doing X.
By doing X, exactly. By going to, SoulCycle 4 days a week and eating my broccoli or whatever. You can make that one much more specific if you wanted. But it's got to be tangible and realistic enough that you could do it. So if let's say you're 100 pounds overweight, you can't say I want to lose 100 pounds in 3 months. It won't work. It's just truly unrealistic.
It's not.
It's not realistic. It's not achievable. And so I think that's a really big pitfall for people, is that sometimes using SMART, I think people think if they're specific enough, they will achieve the result because it is specific. And one of the things I've learned in doing a little bit of research around this topic, just, I've done, shame to admit, I've done everything from like Tony Robbins coaching to, you name it, I've done it. I've been an athlete for 30 years, like all the things, all the like go get 'em motivators, like all of it. But there's some interesting research and some conflicting commentary around how you set successful goals. So an HBR article I was reading was saying that there's a few tips to setting more achievable goals, and they are: connect your goal with a why. So you need to give the sort of why statement. I think that's a pretty common goal that's actually research supported. 2 is you have to break your goals down. So this is another big one that if you've ever listened to like David Goggins talk or read any of the books about sort of like crazy high achievers or people who just achieve incredible feats, they have this ability to break down goals into like really bite-sized nuggets that make the next step much easier. And I'm going to talk about another book in a second once I get through these 5 that I actually think is worth reading if you're interested in goal setting. I'm about 75% of the way through it, but I give you guys the synopsis. The third tip is that you need to buffer time for your goals. So basically people will be like, oh, I want to achieve this thing in a month, if you think like a month is a realistic timeline. And the research basically says that you need to give yourself almost a 25 to 30% buffer on any of those assumptions. Because if you don't, it's severely demotivating, but also like you're probably just automatically underestimating the amount of time it will take you. So if you don't give yourself adequate time in the like timely part of the SMART goals, it doesn't work. I think people always underestimate or want to do things more quickly. 4, which is another one that's sort of continuation of a lot of the research I've been reading, is a focus on continuation, not improvement. So when you set goals that are based on a continuation, which you and I were just talking about.
Like what I do.
Exactly. So when Tyson's like, I just want to be more great than I already am. You're basically eliminating the problem that a lot of people have, which is when they say, I want to lose 100 pounds in 60 days, they're basically treating their existing self as inadequate. And what you do when you do that is you eliminate all the motivation mechanisms that are sort of natural in the process of moving forward towards a goal, because
you basically the happiness equation. I will be happy when.
I don't know enough about that. Yeah, it's kind of like, well, it's more. I think it creates self-sabotage, right? So if you're kind of like, I'm so far in debt, why would I learn to save more money? Like, fuck it. It creates like the fuck it mentality, because you're like, oh, well, I'm already so fat, like 100 pounds in 60 days is going to work, so fuck it. Instead of being like, wait a minute, like I'm just going to focus on doing this one thing better for a few weeks.
Right. And I think there has to be like enjoying the process in that and being happy as you're like going through the process, versus like this idea of like, I will be happy when I'm 10 pounds skinnier, or then, it just, you never get it. Or like, I will be happy when I've saved $10,000. No, like there needs to be joy throughout that process. Maybe that's exactly what you're talking about.
I think it's about enjoying the process, but that's about continuation. So the idea, I think, is to set yourself up for success. You need to pick a version of something you're already doing to do more of, instead of trying to do something brand new or out of the box. So, and then the fifth one from this sort of HBR research piece is don't dwell on past failures. So basically, like, if you fucked up and didn't do this goal last year, like, let it go. Like, let yourself, yeah, cool, whatever, I'm human, I fucked up, moving on. And I will say a lot of these things, I did a nutrition program, as a lot of people know, probably 2 years ago or so. I'm a huge fan of it. Precision Nutrition, I would rep these guys. That's not a paid ad, that's an Alexa endorsement. I lost like 35 pounds. I got completely shredded. It was just an amazing experience for me. And a lot of the psychology in that program is the same as these rules, which is like, okay, like, you ate a brownie, you fucked up. It's okay. First of all, it wasn't a fuck up. You're human. You're allowed to have a brownie, but like, just don't do it again at the next meal. Like, get back to the things that you know. Like, all is not lost because Alexa ate a brownie. Like, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be better over time, more and more than you were before. And so when you fuck up, like, you don't judge yourself for the brownie. You just, yeah, cool. I had a brownie. It was great. And now I'm going to go back to eating my vegetables, my lean proteins, and not beat myself up for it.
And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong.
I'm going to focus on behaviors, that are a continuation of some of the things I already do. So I already eat a lot of lean protein. I'm going to work on working more of that into certain meals. Or I already eat a lot of vegetables. I'm going to focus on eating more of a certain kind that will fill me up or whatever. Versus saying like, oh, I normally eat donuts and, bonbons for breakfast. I'm going to start eating broccoli for breakfast. Like, the latter won't work. It has to be a continuation of something that you've already been doing or has a positive spin. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, like, this is all kind of sounding like work to your strengths and don't try to, like, reinvent the wheel so much because you will set yourself up for failure. Like, you really need to make sure that you're making incremental changes and
2 degrees at a time.
Right. Just like adding things. I think people call it habit stacking, maybe, is like another thing that is pretty popular in terms of like,
idea.
Yeah. So like, every morning I have a cup of coffee. Well, maybe when I'm having that cup of coffee, I can put a podcast on that's educational that I can listen to. Right. And so on and so forth. Then next time I'm listening to a podcast, having my coffee and I've got a face mask on or something, you know what I mean? Or I'm stretching or whatever that looks like. Yeah. So it's this idea of like, adding incrementally. I think another thing I recently saw, I think it was Warren Buffett, there's a quote where he said, write down the 25 things that are like that you want to achieve or that are important to you. Pick the top 5 and never think about the other 20 again. Yeah. And I like that because it's like sometimes, we go into the new year, let's say, or into any sort of goal setting, whether it be personal or in the workplace. And we want to, we see this in engagement action plans a lot. We want to achieve, the moon and back. Like, it's this huge amount of, expectations that we put on ourselves. And the best thing we can do is just do a few things really, really, really well. And that's more like, very true from a business perspective, from a personal perspective, but more so like from a business perspective is like focus, and just execute. And I think that is the key. And oftentimes, like when I've seen goal setting in organizations, like you have to put in 5 goals, like these big lofty goals that are just like so ridiculous, or like even more than
5
that.
goals
like
is too many to me.
People have these like huge lists of goals, and it's just not worth it.
It's just not possible. You can't focus on that much shit.
Well, that's what I mean, because then you hit, if it's a New Year thing, you hit February and you've already forgotten it. And also, when we're talking about business goals, guarantee, and this is my issue with setting goals in a business landscape, is that by February, everything is different. We have just reprioritized the whole kit and caboodle. Something happened out of our control, and now everything is new. So this idea of setting like annual goals in a business context just doesn't seem realistic anymore for most businesses. Obviously, there are some like high level goals, like maybe it's like, the amount of profit or something like that you might look at from like an annual perspective, as like, we naturally do with like annual earnings and stuff like that. But all that to say is, with business goals, like I struggle with them because often we set these OKRs and then it's like, change, psych, we're doing something completely new.
Yeah, I think it's really hard because and we can talk a little bit more about this in a second, because I want to make sure to finish our thoughts here on a couple of these other ideas, but it's interesting because it's like you're always torn between, and I know this having been in many startups and younger companies, like it's really easy to throw a fucking pie in the sky goal at the wall, and everyone kind of tells, especially like current modern business acumen is like, big, hairy, audacious goals, right? Like BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. And it's like, that's what we've all been told is like how you build big, fast, successful companies and how they scale quickly. And like, so-and-so had this ridiculous idea and this huge vision and we just ran at it. And it's like, well, yeah, that's true sometimes and in those unicorn scenarios. But for the most part, unless you're a fairly well-established business with like a couple decades of consistent performance, or at least a big enough scaled business to have on a year-to-year basis, a window of, let's call it 10 or 20% in each direction that the business is likely to hit in terms of target, it's really hard to predict a lot of the shit you try to predict as a business. Mm-hmm. And to your point, it's like, you don't ever want to give your team, like I set goals for my team all the time. I also realistically will tell them like, these goals are going to have to change because this just isn't realistic. Like this X happened or this failed or this fell apart. We had to shut that down, or this went really well. So we're going to divert attention over here to, for a longer 4-term play or 4-year play, whatever it is. You're always between this sort of like weird rock and hard place, which is like, you want to set goals so people know where they have to go and how to set a North Star for people, but you also don't want to be in the habit of like changing that goal so consistently that people go like, this doesn't matter because it's going to change in 3 months. Right. So it's I think that's what good management, good leadership is for, is like, here's the North Star and the North Star kind of stays the same. And then, and it's why a lot of good larger businesses set 5 and 10 year goals, because they're like, we just can't, the ship is too big to change or to turn in 1 year increments. Like, we're just too big a business. So like, we've got to break this stuff down into like much smaller chunks, but keep our eyes on kind of like the bigger prize at the end of the tunnel, which is actually the last piece of research I wanted to touch on. Is a good segue, is a really big piece of that research. So there's a book, and I like I said, I'm about 75% of the way through it, but I've read enough to know what's helpful for this conversation. It's called Clearer, Closer, Better by, I believe her name is Emily Balcetis. I probably butchered that, but she's a researcher. And she wrote this really awesome book basically about how successful people see the world. And I highly recommend reading it. It's a really easy read. It's a great audiobook as well. I listened to half of it, I'm reading the other half. But basically she goes through these kind of like big ideas around how successful people look at focus and look at things like goal setting. So the first one, it's funny that you were just talking about it, is basically about narrowing your focus to achieve goals more effectively. So she tells this story basically of this woman who's like, I think she was the first ever female Olympic marathon runner. And they interviewed her, and I think they've done a bunch of research, and she was like, I don't think about 26.2 miles. Like, at no point during a marathon do I think about that I have to run 26 miles. I pick one person who is running in front of me, and I try to beat them. And then once I pass that person, I pick the next person in front of me, and I try to beat them. And she does that for 26.2 miles, and she's like a world famous runner at this point for Olympic marathon distances, which is 26.2 miles, which is a lot of fucking miles. So it's funny because she sets like small, manageable goals that are simplified to like just the person in front of her. So that's one. Another one is they talk a lot about materializing your goals. So like they talk about, I think there's this famous swimmer that puts like he and his coach put the times that he has to be doing in practice trials on his kickboard. They write them on his kickboard. So when he's doing drills with his kickboard in practice, he can see the times that he needs to be making and like visualize it. Mm-hmm. Obviously there's like lots of examples of visualizing goals, but that's another big one. Like you're more likely to sort of be okay with things outside of your comfort zone and things throwing you off if you have a way to like materialize exactly what it is that you're trying to get to in a more tangible way. And then there's some other ones, but the ones I can remember are like, I think holding yourself accountable to other people is super helpful. And then the other one I think was interesting was basically like knowing where to direct your attention can keep you focused on a goal. And what's interesting about this, if you read the book, is that what they're actually talking about in the first set of takeaways is narrowing your focus to something very specific, like just the runner in front of you. But by the last takeaway, what they're talking about is that you actually need to have a much bigger picture, because otherwise you can't keep the unimportant or the radical shit in perspective, and it will throw you off. So basically, highly achieving people and very successful people are constantly, in a very efficient, very sort of scientifically studied way in the book, toggling between very simplistic goals, very focused right in front of them, and much bigger picture North Star shit that keeps all of that in line. So they're constantly like successfully toggling between those two things. And it's really interesting to think about the juxtaposition of how we do that, especially when we're like obsessed with productivity culture. I feel like people get very like, right now, today, look at my to-do list, blah, blah, blah. It's like, you gotta step, and like Warren Buffett, like step back, write down the 25 things, pick 5, and tell everybody else to fuck off. Like, you've got to have a North Star or you're just going to get lost in the bullshit.
Totally. And how I've heard that spoken about is short-term impatient, but long-term patient. So like getting shit done in the immediate and like achieving, but then also like knowing that each of those little things that you're achieving is setting you up strategically for something that's long-term, like a long-term, like big goal.
What happens if you're just always impatient?
Yeah, like us.
Like us.
Yeah, but yeah, like, because there needs to be sort of like that bigger picture, like you said, like a bigger, more grandiose thing that you're working towards.
Yeah, and the one thing I will say, and I think we should move on to like personal and professional goals real quick for people. But the one thing I will say is like, I can only speak from a personal perspective on this, is like, anytime I have set a goal because I thought I was supposed to, or because it sounded cool, it's never fucking happened. Like, I only joined that nutrition program because I had finally gotten so tired of being fat in photos that I was like, it's time to fix this. My goal was not to lose a certain amount of weight. My goal was to get into a program that would help me eat better. And I did that. So I achieved that, but because I was finally at a place, so it's like when they say addicts, like you can't help an addict who doesn't want to be helped. Like, you gotta want the thing. Like, don't put lose 5 pounds on your fucking New Year's resolutions because you think you're supposed to want that. Like, if you want to eat cookies more than you want to lose 5 pounds, then don't put 5 pounds on as a goal. Like, do the thing, like focus on 2 or 3 things that like you really fucking want, or that would really matter to you if you could focus on.
And that's the key. Like, that they matter. So like you can say like lose 5 pounds, and that just, it's such a surface level, like artificial goal, so to speak. Like, it's like it's just is that really going to mean that much to
or
you?
Is the goal like feel better about how you look and feel every day and be more confident? Because that's a very different goal than lose 5 pounds. Very different. Very different.
Yeah,
one might cause you to eat better and exercise more than the other, and I bet you it's not the 5 pounds one.
Right, because if you ground yourself in like what you truly want and like the why behind the goal, then like, you know, I want to eat better because I want to be like healthy so that I live a longer life so I can spend more time with my kids, or you know what I mean? Like, there's just like so much more to that. Or I just want to
look the best that I can look, which might not be down 5 pounds. It might actually be up 5 pounds of muscle. Like, everyone's different.
Totally.
Especially, you know, shout out to the skinny bitch females like Tyson, who just have it naturally. But, you know, some of us don't. That's not our jam. It just isn't going to be how we look, you know? So I think people have to be a little more thoughtful, because the goal of this is not to set yourself up for failure, right? If you're going to do this, like, do it, set yourself up for success. Like, start slow, pick something easy that you're already kind of doing that you want to focus on. Yeah, and I would say, like, you know, to Warren Buffett's point, like, pan out on like the 5 things or 3 to 5 things that like you want in your life in general, and then bring them into like, what can I do this year to make those possible?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And if, you know, you have a slip up, just like, you know, start like it's not like the whole thing goes down the drain. Just begin again. Exactly.
Begin again for you meditation dorks. Begin again. Cool. So let's talk really quickly, just as a last thought here, let's talk really quickly about, and obviously want your expertise on this, Tyson, a little bit about how to discuss work goals. So 2 things. One, I think, how do you know, when you're filling out that stupid fucking, like, what are my goals for the year? I think God doesn't do that shit anymore. What do you do? How do you do that in a way that, is productive and effective? And then my second question, which we'll get to, is just like, what's a good way to talk about goals with a manager or a boss when you think maybe there's some misalignment?
Right. Okay. So for the first thing, I think the best thing to do is set up a way in which you are relooking at these goals on a regular basis. So whether it's like every 6 weeks or monthly or whatever that looks like, you can't just sort of like post and pray with goals, like write and pray that they come true, right? Although I sort of do that from a personal perspective, like when I put a business hat on, like we really have to make sure that we're constantly iterating on those goals so that they align. Another thing, a common fallacy, I think would be this sort of like recency bias as it relates to goals. So you might know, for example, okay, let's say we're setting them for January. You might know that you have like these 3 things to do in January, and then you make those your goals, and then boom, 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 goals achieved in January. Like it doesn't, you really have to sort of like be cognizant of that if you're looking more long-term, which like I actually question or not whether you should. I think that you need to look a quarter out and to the best of your ability, try to understand like, hey, like what is the work that you're going to be doing and how you're going to measure success in those in that work. I think that you need to paint a picture of what good looks like and what success looks like. I said how, and then like again, you can kind of like pull in the why from a business perspective as well. Where I would coach managers in terms of the why is like, why the hell are we working on this? And does it achieve the bigger goal, or is this fluff work? Right. We want to make sure we are hyper focused, do a few things really well, nothing else matters. Okay. So I would, work with the manager in terms, sort of segueing into your next question, in terms of like identifying like big picture, what is that North Star? Like you mentioned, like what is like our main goal? Like what is the outcome of what we want to achieve?
And as a manager, you should be able to paint that picture both from the company level as well as your team's version of that picture. Right. And if you can't, get the fuck out of management.
Yeah. So it's the main outcome. Like what are we trying to achieve? And then I think you mentioned it in one of the research that you pulled out is sort of like pull out from there, like what needs to be done to achieve that. And then again, if you're talking like from a manager perspective, it's also really important to identify like who is responsible and like who are the stakeholders so that we know who is accountable for the results. Again, like it could be the manager, or it could be a situation where if they're sort of project planning for their entire team, like certain individuals are taking on certain things. And then of course, communicating that. So I think in terms of if there's misalignment, like aligning on the vision, the North Star to begin with, everyone needs to be able to do that. And then from there, it should be easy enough to like set goals that achieve that, again, for the short term, and then constantly like touching base in terms of like how things are going. Do things need to be updated? Has there been some sort of major shift that would result in those goals changing?
And so what do you do when you get handed down a goal from the higher ups that maybe feels unreasonable or feels misaligned, or maybe even isn't your manager's fault, but like, how do you deal with the, like, I just had my annual goal setting meeting and WTF?
So we used to actually do this in one of my previous companies. It was called goal cascading. So basically the CHRO would set his goals, and then from those goals, his leadership team would set goals that were this aligned but relevant to the work that they did, and so on and so forth, until it got down to us. So we actually were just aligning our goals to leadership but making it our own. And I would say that is actually the right thing to do in a sense, because like if you as an employee, an individual contributor, are not aligned with the goals of the leader, then that's really problematic, and we should all be working towards the same thing. Again, if we are hyper focused and working on the right things to achieve big picture, your goals should be aligned. Now, if it's some bullshit goal that a leader gave you, then that's a little bit different, but there should be alignment to ensure that we're all sort of paddling the boat in the same direction.
Yeah, I think that gets missed a lot, though. I think that's why, like, heaven forbid I use the word, but like disengagement gets so rampant in some places. It's because you're like, I'm just doing this. Like, let's be honest, a lot of jobs feel menial. If you stepped back and said, what am I adding to civilization today? You'd be like, I wrote a lot of fucking emails. It's why the internet is rampant with memes about how all we do at work is write emails, right?
Right.
So it's really easy to get disengaged when you haven't been set up to think about what you're contributing to the larger lattice of people who have to accomplish things. So if you walk into those meetings with your manager and go, my job is to help you do X, when you start slacking the fuck off, you're going to be like, oh man, I'm going to keep, Joey the manager from getting to Joey's goal, or I'm going to hinder the whole team from contributing this project that this other team needs to launch this big thing. And that affects a lot of people, right? Like, you just can't put any perspective on it if it hasn't been painted to you as like you're helping achieve the following thing that's bigger than you.
Right. And I think what's interesting is like goal cascading kind of got like a bad name in the industry. Like, people just thought it was very like stuffy and corporate, and like, you know, it's just
really
it kind
seems
of got
anti-stuffy to me.
Right. So it kind of got this bad name, I think, because it was used by like more corporate places versus like fun startup-y places. But then
let's bring it back.
When we look at things like engagement surveys and we see questions that are like, I know how my work contributes to the goals of the overall company, that question scores low, and people are like, we're all just sort of like running around like without any direction. And I actually think that obviously it's not like a situation where we're just saying, okay, Tyson, these are your goals, X, Y, and Z. But it's like, hey, Tyson, I'm your leader and these are my goals. I want to share those transparently with you so that you can align to them and think about ways, and we can think about this together, ways in which we can use these goals that have been cascaded from my leader and from their leader, and then put a spin on them so it's relevant to the work that you're doing specifically.
Right.
So
I was actually just talking to a friend who decided to leave a company because a new manager came in, was, you know, a sales guy, doing a bunch of shady shit, moving people around, doing all kinds of unexplained things as only terrible managers do. And he was explaining to me that basically he was working on a big client deal. There was going to be a big fat check for him. And this new manager came in and pulled the deal from him, which is like, if you have ever managed salespeople, that's a no-no. Like, you don't pull like one of your best salespeople's biggest deals from them. Like, you just don't fuck with people's money. That's sales 101.
Right.
But what's interesting is that when I asked him, I said, hey, like, what are your, in this case, the regional manager or whatever was a woman. I said, hey, what are her goals? Like, what is she gunning for here? Besides, obviously, like, you know, I'm assuming you guys have like a team revenue number. Like, what are her goals? What does she get paid on? And he was like, I have no idea. And I was like, that's a problem. That's a problem, because you can't interpret anything she's doing accurately without that. So all you see is like, this chick doesn't like me. She's fucking with my money. I gotta go. When all it could be is like, she's trying to restructure territories because, you know, A, B, or C is coming down the pipeline. Like, no idea. But that's, you know, that's what good managers do, is they fill you in and they make you part of the conversation.
When there's a lot of change without people understanding the reason why, that fucking pisses people off. That's like,
yeah, and I get it. It's deservedly so.
That's what I mean. It totally is. That's one of the hardest things. Like, I think that we need to do a better job. Also, like, in the scope of goal setting, like, why can't I know what my manager's goals are?
It doesn't make any sense that you couldn't. Like, if you can't know what they are, then then there's like a problem.
That's
right.
Suspicious.
Like, this isn't a drug cartel.
Right.
Right. Like, unless my manager's goal involves a body count or illicit behaviors, like, why can't I know? Odds are it has something to do with like engagement, dollars, clients, or like product releases. Like, the world's not that complicated.
Or why wouldn't they want me to also be working towards that goal? I think that's the other thing that, like, you know, think about goal setting as like a team effort here. Like, this isn't just like and I know in like a lot of, like, it's a rat race out there. I get it, right? Everybody's trying to like achieve the goal so that they can be seen and get promoted, etc. But I really would like to see this sort of as like a team effort. Like, we're all working towards the same thing, but obviously like put your own spin on it. I also think, like, from an HR perspective, specifically, it can be really hard to measure our goals. And also, like, going back to a SMART goal, it can be really difficult to measure them, and it can be really difficult to have like time-bound goals, because oftentimes, like, what I always found was my goals were sort of like ongoing. It was like, okay, I'm going, like, you don't just like do it, check it off, and say you're done. It's not like a sales target, right? Where you're just like, yeah, reach the target, done. It's like, there is a way that we need to like continue to show up and partner and like achieve, that's like very continuous and fluid. So I'm kind of like anti-SMART goal, because I don't believe that like we're not making widgets. It's not just like checking the box. So I would encourage people, like, I always used to say, like, I used to have to make SMART goals, and I used to always put as like the time, in the time section, I would just say like ongoing. Like, fuck off, I'm not putting a timestamp on this. It depends. Yeah, exactly.
TBD. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the limitation to SMART, is it's like a little too rigid. And I just am not sure. I think SMART goals are really good for when the goals are task oriented, when the goals are highly measurable, when the goals are pretty short term, as it says, timely is one of the, is the T in SMART.
Yeah. Did you know a lot of this stuff actually originated from like factory workers, like the whole like performance process of like goal setting, and like we haven't really changed it. A lot of companies.
So like HR, it's where HR came from. Yeah,
it's still the same.
Precedence is a bitch, Tyson.
Yeah,
but no more. It's a new year, new things coming.
Yeah.
We're going to do this all better together collectively as the Peeps community here. Listeners, you're now being held accountable to doing this shit better, because Lord knows the corporate goal setting process is a nightmare. Cool. All right. Well, any last thoughts on goal setting for the exciting year ahead?
I don't think so. I think
we have lots of exciting stuff planned for people. So thank you for joining us for another year of People Problems. We've got some documentary club episodes coming up, like the Abercrombie episode we did. So maybe even a book club episode. We've got some exciting guests. Got all kinds of stuff coming up this year.
So our goal is to keep bringing you excellent content. Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of our goals. That into like 400x our listenership. Super reasonable.
So spread the word. Help us
spread the word.
Reach our goals.
Yes. It's attainable to ask our listenership to spread the word.
We love you guys.
Love you. All right, guys. That's a wrap.
And don't forget to join our community, the People Ops Society. Pops is our listener and People Pro community. Members can use the forum for peer feedback, download awesome resources and templates written by peers, connect with thought leaders in the HR and benefits space, and get access to free courses all included in your membership. Use the code PeopleProblems at peopleopsociety.com to get 20% off your membership today. Use the code PeopleProblems at peopleopsociety.com to join our community. People Problems is recorded and mixed by Emma Parker at Chickadee Films with production assistance by Anna Parker. People Problems is managed by Emily Melton Lemons. For more information and to sign up for our weekly newsletter where we dive deeper into hot topics and share our great finds, go to peopleproblemspod.com. Please make sure to follow us on all things social at People Problems Pod. Follow Tyson at hr.shook and follow me, Alexa Baggio, at The Influencer, spelled with an HR. Thanks for listening and catch you next week.